One quick shout out before we get started. We have my uncle here, all the way from Los Angeles, California. He made the 3,000-mile trek just for this presentation.
And he could have watched it online.
He could have watched it online. He's not very bright. Yeah, there's nothing like it. Want to be in person. All right, so this is what we're going to go through. We're going to cover 9/11, the Patriot Act, the Iraq War. Then we'll take a break. We'll come back. I'll talk about the Afghanistan War in particular. Then we'll get to usual, Q&A and discussion questions, which are currently on your seat. But I'm going to start with a kind of big picture question. You can talk about this amongst yourselves. I'll give you like a minute to kind of jot down your thoughts, and I'll see what you think of this. So go with this for the opening prompt for today. What is the nature of cancer? How does it function? And then what I really want you to try to do is, why in the world am I asking you this question to start with? What is the possible connection to what we're going to be talking about today and things that we've been talking about? So take a second. If you want to jot down your thoughts, that'd be great. Then I'll ask somebody to volunteer their answer. But what's the nature of cancer? How does it function? Why am I asking you this? What's the possible connection to what we're going to talk about? So I'll give you a minute. All right, my students know this quite well. I love analogies and connections through that style. So, how does cancer function? How does it operate? What does it do? It spreads. What else does it do? It destroys. It expands and it exploits. That's basically what it does. Yeah.
I see it as, and I wish I had poems I've written about this.
Yeah.
I've had cancer, but cancer is the face of our industrial culture. It is really what the culture naturally produces.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great connection. Yeah, Jade.
If you don't catch it early on, it's really hard to stop it from continuing.
It grows so big, and then it's out of control. It's unmanageable after a while. All right, I hope somebody can see through the analogy. What is the analogy that I'm going for here? Why would I ask you this? How does it possibly connect to things we've been discussing and things that we're definitely going to discuss today? That's it. It's cancer, in my eyes, is a perfect analogy for the way the capitalist economic system operates. So if you read this quote up here, but in modern capitalism, a business that merely brings in a steady profit is considered a failure. Success is defined by what? Continual unchecked growth. What do we call that in biology? If you need to continually grow, it's cancer, okay? So that's the point that I'm trying to make, is capitalism, you see tons of parallels with the way that cancer functions. It has to expand, it has to exploit. If it's not doing that, it's not functioning the way that it was designed to function. And the way that obviously impacts all of us here is, it really comes down to this basic notion of the way that capitalism functions. It is profit before what? People. Basic necessities. All that matters in this system is making as much money as humanly possible, and humanity be damned at the end of the day. So keep that in mind as I go through everything, and hopefully you'll understand the connection that I'm trying to go for here. So how does capitalism tie into everything that I'm going to cover today? Just keep that question at the forefront of your mind, and I think everything will be quite clarifying as we go through. So let's get into George W. Bush and his foreign policy. So let's start with, this could only happen in the United States. Do you know which mascot witnessed the 9/11 terrorist attacks? Right down there at Ground Zero? Mr. Peanut. So this is just why, you ever remember the Today Show and Al Roker and all that? So this is 10 minutes before the planes actually hit, but somebody was in the Mr. Peanut outfit and witnessed 9/11, which is just crazy to think about.
Hey, Weller, look who's here, Mr. Peanut!
We'll get to the nitty-gritty details, but that just, to me, is just one of those wild things that you can't even make up. But, all right, let's get to the important stuff. Why did 9/11 happen? And that's one of the things that I'd love to actually expand upon, is what are the root causes of 9/11? Everybody knows about the attacks and the events of that day, but why did it take place? That's basically it. That's one of the huge reasons why. So let's start with this. Why do you think the United States did have a ton of enemies around the world at this point in time? Funding terrorism around the world.
Yeah, I mean, destabilizing governments so they can install who they want.
For sure. Here's a great map that really details exactly what you just set up here. All the dots, all the explosions, all the blips on this map. This is every time the U.S. has done what since World War II? Intervene by bombing a country, coupping a government, doing anything. What do you notice about this map? We're everywhere. And I think I showed you this a couple weeks ago, but when they took a poll of the world, do you remember which country was number one when it came to which country is the biggest threat to world peace? It was the U.S., and it's not even close. Okay, like almost 25% of citizens of the world agree. Yeah, it's the United States that's actually the biggest threat to world peace. So that challenges the narrative that you usually hear inside of the U.S. Now, obviously, if you could pinpoint 9/11 on one individual, who's the one individual that people are going to point to for the 9/11 attacks? Osama bin Laden. Does anybody know the actual kind of deeper history, though, of Osama bin Laden? Who used to be a huge fan of Osama bin Laden? The United States. Do you remember why we used to like Osama bin Laden, especially in the 1980s? We were very close with Osama bin Laden. There was one specific event where we provided him and his group with all the funding, all the weapons, everything you would possibly need, because he was very much against another group that the U.S. did not like, the Soviet Union. So this is something that, again, not super well known, but the Soviet war in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989, the Soviets were taking on Afghanistan. Basically the major war broke out inside of Afghanistan, and the U.S. did not want the Soviets to succeed here at all, and here's why. There was a revolution inside of Afghanistan, and the communists ended up taking over. What are the, and I'll put this in quotes, horrible things that the communists did inside of Afghanistan that the U.S. is not going to like one bit? They nationalized resources, which the U.S. doesn't like. They created job equality between men and women, so God forbid. What's the second bullet point say up there? Land reform for who? For the poor, so redistribution of land, those sorts of things. U.S. is not going to like that. So what they end up doing is backing, I hope you remember this group, the Mujahideen.
Yeah.
And how did we phrase the Mujahideen, however, though? We called them what? They're the freedom fighters. They're taking on the evil communists, and they are true freedom fighters. But yeah.
Didn't somebody say Afghanistan was where empires went to die?
Definitely. It's the graveyard of empires. Yeah, and that totally rings true. So, but for Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen, Osama bin Laden was one of the key figures inside the Mujahideen. So he had deep ties to the CIA, and the U.S. was providing him with training, with funding, with weapons, with everything that they needed to fight the evil communists in our eyes. And that's how Osama bin Laden really rose to prominence, and the Mujahideen were able to succeed in defeating the Soviet Union, ultimately. And you can read headlines during the time period. It's not what you would typically think. What does this headline say about Osama bin Laden? He puts his army on what? The road to peace. Okay, that's the sort of propaganda that you were seeing in the 1980s when it came to groups like this. Like Osama bin Laden, the Mujahideen, they're wonderful people. They're all about peace, and they're good at the end of the day. And then remember last week we talked about the military entertainment complex. You also see this sort of sentiment represented in U.S. movies. I'll give you a great example. Rambo 3 takes place during the Soviet Afghanistan War. What do you think this entire movie is about? How awesome the Mujahideen are and how evil the Soviets are. So you saw that reinforced constantly, with all the propaganda that obviously popped up. Now, this is a little bit tougher. Do you know why Osama bin Laden eventually fell out of favor with the United States? And this happened in the 90s. There's a multitude of reasons why, but I'd be very curious if anyone can pinpoint at least one. So he had a very close connection with Osama bin Laden, the Mujahideen. Then that relationship started to fall apart. Do you know why? I'll give you a hint. It's got something to do with a war that the U.S. was engaged in the 1990s that we've already talked about. The Gulf War. Okay, so Operation Desert Storm. Now, this is stuff that is not well known, and I think this is things that you're going to find fairly fascinating. Osama bin Laden in 2002 wrote a letter to the American people where he detailed his major reasons of why he committed and planned the 9/11 attacks. So I'll go through these with you one by one, because like I said, this is very lesser known history of why that attack ultimately took place. So for number one up here, this is one of the biggest things that led to that fracture between bin Laden and the US government. So number one, where did the US station troops even after the Gulf War was over that bin Laden's not going to like? In the Holy Land of Mecca, so right in Saudi Arabia. Mecca is the holiest of sites for Muslims, and the U.S. stationed troops directly inside of Mecca. So he thought that was a huge violation of some of the agreements that they had.
Right inside of Mecca?
The U.S.?
In
Yeah, like in Mecca itself, we had troops stationed. I'll show you a picture of it in a second, but yes, not very smart. Number two, what else did he not like that we talked about in weeks past? What did the U.S. do to predominantly Islamic countries? Those massive sanctions that led to the deaths of millions of people, from starvation and disease and these other issues. Number three is an interesting one that I don't think many people would think Osama bin Laden would care about this, but he was very upset about climate change, and the U.S. military greatly contributes to climate change, and he thought that was a massive concern. But yeah.
Albright famously said that 500 million dead children was 500,000.
It's worth it. That's what you said. The price of those dead children is worth it. I played that clip last week, actually, of Madeleine Albright. So yeah, absolutely. Number four, he did not like the U.S. intervening and just imperializing, basically around the world. And then for number five is another major one. But who did he not like the U.S.'s unwavering of support for? Israel. Okay, and he thought that the abuse of Israel at the expense of Palestinians was also something that was very much against his values. So the Persian Gulf War, just to show you pictures of what I'm talking about, the U.S. has troops stationed inside of Saudi Arabia, inside of Mecca, which, bin Laden clearly did not like. He ends up starting Al-Qaeda. But just so you know, we have tons of military bases scattered across the Middle East today, and really across the entire Islamic world. So when you look closely at this map, what do you notice about U.S. bases? Where are they? They're all over the place. So that really is something that turned bin Laden off to the United States. I don't think many people remember this, but bin Laden bombed a couple U.S. embassies in the mid-1990s because they stationed U.S. troops there. So, there's a few that I have up here in particular, some of these African embassies, but that's where you started to see this turn with bin Laden, some of these, the U.S. in particular. But the sanctions obviously played a role, U.S. imperialism. Like I said, he did not like climate change. I don't know if I've shown you this graph or not, but you can see how much the U.S. military emits just in raw CO2. What do you notice on this graph? It's more than what? More than entire countries. Okay, so that's obviously a huge concern. There is an upcoming documentary. It hasn't been released yet, but this documentary I'm really looking forward to. It's Abby Martin and the Empire Files, who's just a great modern-day journalist. But she's creating a documentary called Earth's Greatest Enemy that is completely dedicated to exposing how much the U.S. military pollutes and the impact that has around the world. So just something I wanted to raise your attention on that I think is going to be fascinating when it comes out either later this year or next year. But yeah, the other stuff is things that we've obviously talked about. Bin Laden was not a fan of U.S. support for Israel and the way that Israel, obviously oppresses Palestinians, as we've talked about in weeks past. And that's when he starts to plot the 9/11 attacks in particular, the hijackers and, going after the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and maybe the White House or Congress as well. But what I want to get into for the Bush administration is, how did the Bush administration respond to this potential threat from Al-Qaeda and bin Laden's group? Do you know what was on Condoleezza Rice's desk 36 days before the 9/11 attacks? Okay.
Intel.
There was intel. Let me play you this clip, because eventually they got questioned on it, but maybe it was too vague for her to really understand what was happening here. So let me play this.
Do something about.
Isn't it a fact, Dr. Rice, that the August 6 PDB warned against possible attacks in this country? And I ask you whether you recall the title of that PDB.
I believe the title was Bin Laden Determined to Attack Inside the United States.
Pretty tough. Who knows what that possibly could have meant, So that was 36 days before 9/11. the security, the intelligence was saying like, yeah, Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, they're probably planning something. What did the Bush administration do in response to that? Basically nothing, okay? So obviously the horrific attacks take place on 9/11. I'm sure everybody remembers this. I was actually a senior in high school when these attacks took place. This meme is really just for me, I think in particular, but I don't know if anybody remembers this, but before we have like all the technology that we have inside the classroom, usually what would happen inside of schools is a teacher would wheel in a cart with a TV on it, and kids would get really excited because what was that day going to be about? It's movie day, we're gonna watch like movies, this is gonna be great, it's like a free day. They wheel in the cart, and what did they turn on the TV? 9/11, and I saw the second plane hit live in my math class, it was wild, so. But yeah, for the attacks themselves, I remember, when it happened, when the first plane hit, I remember my math teacher coming around and saying like, oh, like we think some like pilot malfunction happened and he just crashed into the Twin Tower. And then we all turned the TV on and then we saw the second plane hit and everybody knew like, oh, this is something very, very serious. And then that's what we did for the rest of the day. It was pretty much be glued to the TV and watch the events unfold. But end result of the 9/11 attacks is almost 3,000, Americans were killed. The thing that I'll never forget is the images of like people jumping. That's something that has stuck with me forever. But end result of this is obviously the Pentagon, was also hit as well. But do you know what group of people needed serious help in the aftermath of 9/11? And they really did not receive the help they need after, first responders. So this to me is just, absolutely disgraceful. The people that rushed in and tried to save as many people as humanly possible in the most, horrific of circumstances.
There, he ended up with testicular cancer a year or so later.
Exactly. So a lot of horrific forms of cancer developing. And is everybody familiar with Jon Stewart from the Daily Show? This to me, this is why this is so disgraceful. The Congress eventually set up a fund to pay for all the medical treatments for any first responder that might have developed some sort of asthma, cancer, any sort of illness. Do you think Congress has ever done a great job of properly funding that thing? No, so what Jon Stewart has to do almost every single year is he goes to Congress and he has to give testimony and beg for them to properly fund this thing for people that, risk their lives to save as many people as possible. Why is that actually pretty important to understand? Why is that something that I definitely want to highlight? What does it tell you? They don't care. Just soulless. All right, let's get into this is really the heart of my presentation. How did President Bush, how did the government, and how did the media respond to 9/11? So let's go with this. What was President Bush doing as the 9/11 attacks were unfolding? Does anybody remember what he was actually doing during this? Yeah, Lucas? Exactly. Let me play you this clip if you've forgotten what George W. Bush was doing during this attack.
As the attack took place, Mr. Bush was on his way to an elementary school in Florida. When informed of the first plane hitting the World Trade Center, where terrorists had struck just 8 years prior, Mr. Bush decided to go ahead with his photo opportunity.
Good morning, boys and girls. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Real quick, do you want to take a guess what program he was pitching here? What act? No Child Left Behind. Yes, that's what he was trying to pitch during this.
I have what would you need? Read this word the fast way. Get ready. Mad. Yes, mad. Get ready. Mad.
Yeah.
Okay, get ready to read the words on this page without making a mistake.
When the second plane hit the tower, his chief of staff entered the classroom and told Mr. Bush, the nation is under attack. Not knowing what to do, with no one telling him what to do, and no Secret Service rushing in to take him to safety, Mr. Bush just sat there and continued to read My Pet Goat with the children. Nearly 7 minutes passed with nobody doing anything. As Bush sat in that Florida classroom, was he wondering if maybe he should have shown up to work more often? Should he have held at least one meeting since taking office to discuss the threat of terrorism with his head of counterterrorism?
You get it. But basically, that's what President Bush did. He just sat there. And you know what the excuse was, or what was the excuse that the Bush administration came up with after that? Didn't want to scare the kids, okay? So didn't want to terrify the children. Could there have been maybe a way for him to silently get out of that classroom without alerting them to what was happening? I would say so. But the big picture stuff that I want to focus on, do you think many people actually examined or critically thought about the reasons behind the 9/11 attack? No, what typically happens in the build-up to a war all throughout U.S. history instead? Nationalism. Yes, hyper-nationalism. I'd say it borders on jingoism, ultimately, yeah.
I called the radio station they were having discussing when these things happened, and I suggested the whole thing of the chickens coming, and I actually felt afraid to go out after that I was going to, I remember riding my bike up in the switchbacks and thinking, I'm going to get shot.
Definitely.
Because that's the feeling I had.
I'm going to give you some great examples that back up your feelings. So yes, that's spot on. Because what ends up happening, do you know how the media responded to 9/11 and the Bush administration? Did they cover for him? Oh yeah, and I'll never forget this. I'm a big sports fan, I'm a big Yankees fan. The Yankees made it to the World Series in 2001. Who threw out the first pitch at one of the games at Yankee Stadium? President Bush. And let's take a look at how he was greeted and how he was portrayed with his first pitch at Yankee Stadium.
For tonight's ceremonial first pitch, and please welcome the President of the United States.
Oh my God, he threw a strike. We're going to be all right as a nation. We're going to be okay. We can get through this. Look how strong President Bush is going out there and throwing that first pitch. And this had effects. Here's Bush's approval rating after 9/11 took place. What was the highest approval rating that he had? 90%. Is that unheard of in American history? Yeah, but what do you notice about his approval rating before 9/11? It was diving down, and all of a sudden, we got to rally around the president. We need to protect him. He's the one that can get us through this. And then it leads to this trickle-down effect of the entire Bush administration. This, to me, is so unhinged, I can't even put it into words or just let it speak for itself. Do we all know People magazine? Do you know how they have their sexiest man alive? Okay. Does everyone remember Donald Rumsfeld, one of the key cabinet members of the Bush administration? What did they do with these individuals? Glorified them in the weirdest possible, like sexualization sorts of ways, the weirdest ways you could possibly imagine. And then Americans just being pumped full of nationalist propaganda. I'll give you a few examples. And I remember watching this stuff on TV, so I'll play a couple ads that started to air after 9/11.
On September 11th, terrorists tried to change America forever. Well, they succeeded.
And then the next one. This is from the Disney Channel.
The flag means everything to me. It means life, it means freedom, it also means unity, and it means love. You see American flags everywhere, and it reminds you, but it also makes you really proud. I spent my whole life pledging allegiance, and I don't think I can ever look at a flag the same way.
The flag stands for us as a group of people being united and being with each other in a time of need.
I saw a fire truck pass by the other day, and it had an American flag on it, and it was blowing in the wind. It was so amazing, and everyone just started clapping and cheering, and it was really special.
I had to drive cross country. We saw the flags, saw the proud to be American flashing signs on the highway.
All the flags, you ride down the street, and it makes you feel connected, like we're in this together.
It's a beacon of peace and liberty and justice and democracy and we can hold it up high and hold it up proud.
Driving down the street.
You get it, okay? But I guess the main point I'm trying to make, what do these ads demonstrate about the tenor in the country post 9/11? Yes, and here's a quote from President Bush that really backs up what I'm talking about. If you in any way spoke out negatively about the Bush administration, about the government, if you questioned anything, how were you categorized in the United States? You're basically what? You're with the terrorists, so shut your mouth and just fall in line, and that's that. Yeah, so I mean, just unhinged when you really look at some of the basic reasons behind this. But now, what pivotal piece of legislation did the Bush administration eventually pass, like immediately after the 9/11 attacks? The Patriot Act. Okay, so this is October of 2001, just very briefly after 9/11. And the Patriot Act, do you know how this was pitched to the American people? Why do we need to pass the Patriot Act? What is it going to do? It's going to protect everyone. We're going to be allowed to look in on all these terrorist cells. We're going to be able to prevent another 9/11 from happening. We need to pass this immediately. How many representatives in Congress do you think voted against the Patriot Act? That had some questions about this might be government overreach here. Not many. So this was the vote in the House of Representatives, 357 to 66. Okay, and I'll give Bernie some props here. This is when he was a representative from Vermont. He did vote against it, so good for him. Even Rand Paul also voted against it. So people like Rand Paul, Bernie Sanders that don't have a lot politically in common, they did vote to say, hey, this is maybe government overreach. What about in the Senate? How many senators do you think voted against the Patriot Act? One. Russ Feingold. That was it. Okay, so this was almost universally passed. Now, what did the Patriot Act actually give the federal government the right to do? Eavesdrop, spy. But remember, it was pitched that we're only going to look at who, though? Bad guys. We're just going to look for potential terrorists. What did we eventually realize? Everyone. They were tapping into your phone conversations, looking at your emails, looking at any text messages, anything without any sort of warrant. Complete government overreach. So there's tons of examples of this. I like this political cartoon quite a bit, but electronic surveillance, and obviously have the Liberty Bell there, this was a violation of people's basic liberties. So that's what the Patriot Act ultimately did. But why does the US government do this in just about every single war throughout US history? Why do we see this restriction of people's civil liberties that always happens? What is the base reason behind it? It's for your safety. Yeah.
I was just going to say, basically, to put them in a position where they have nothing else to do except be forced to go fight a war and intake the nationalism and the jingoism and just go and fight for the country rather than build their own life and domestically.
That's pretty much it. Exactly. So end result of the Patriot Act, this is who was actually being spied on. You notice, if you look at that 76% number, who are they actually going after with the Patriot Act? Not terrorists, but it was just an expansion of the war on drugs. That's really what it played into ultimately. So that's that. Now, do you know why we know so much about the Patriot Act and those violations of government overreach? Do you remember the name of the whistleblower that actually exposed how this was happening inside of the US government? Do you know which whistleblower I'm talking about? That's Edward Snowden, who worked for the NSA. And he was like, I just can't in good conscience allow this stuff to go unnoticed. So he played a huge role in actually leaking this stuff out to the press. He leaked it to Glenn Greenwald. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that journalist, but do you remember what happened to Edward Snowden once this was found out that he was the one that leaked this stuff to the media? Do you remember where he ended up? Because he had to get out of the country. Yeah, he ended up in Russia, because Russia was actually the only country that provided him with asylum. That's where he still lives today. So Snowden, was very brave in terms of exposing this and really getting deep down in the details of, the government's lying. They're actually taking a deep look at everyone without warrants, and this is a complete violation of your privacy and basic civil rights.
And he was clear-eyed about what would happen to him.
Oh, he knew. Yeah, he knew absolutely that he was going to be going. Do you know which act is still on the books from World War I that allows the government to go after people like Snowden and whistleblowers? It's a tough one. It's still in place, and it has harsh penalties. It's the Espionage Act from 1917. Okay, that's still in place today, that is meant to terrify people out of speaking out against the government. So that's what they were going to use against Snowden, but he got out of the country before they were able to actually arrest him. All right, now for the buildup to the actual Iraq and then Afghanistan wars. But how do you sell a war to the American people? What do we always see?
Humanization and dehumanization of the opposing
Definitely. That's one of the big reasons why. Do we also see just straight up lies being told and pitched? Yeah, we've already talked about that in a few other instances, but can you give me a couple massive lies that were pitched to the American people as 100% absolute truths, and this is why we have to go into Iraq, this is why we have to go into Afghanistan? What were the big picture lies that were pushed heavily? WMDs was the big one. There's one other one, so I'll definitely show you WMDs here in a second. Weapons of mass destruction. What else? It wasn't just bin Laden that plotted the attacks. He had help from someone. Not Saudi Arabia. Saddam. It was Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden got into like this small little room and completely planned the entire 9/11 attacks together, and they're just buddy-buddy, and that's really why this ultimately happened. Do you know the truth about their relationship? Saddam Hussein hated Osama bin Laden. Do you know why? Yeah, definitely. And like Al-Qaeda was also wreaking havoc across the Middle East, destabilizing countries like Iraq. Saddam hated Osama bin Laden, but that was not the way that it was pitched off. These two guys are in cahoots together, and they plotted 9/11. That turned out to be a complete fabrication. And then beyond that, of course, the big lie was the weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein has chemical weapons, he has biological weapons, he might have nuclear weapons, and what is he about to do any second? He's going to use them on us. So what do we need to do?
Scott Ritter was great at all this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
He was really the man who exposed
Yes, for sure. And then you had people like Colin Powell going to the UN with pictures like this as their evidence, which is so pathetic when you look back on it. But that was the piece of evidence that we had that said, yeah, see, this truck, it's got a nuke inside of it. This horrible artistic sketch. We were actually going to the UN and saying, this is our evidence for this. I mean, it's nuts. And then you had outlets like the Washington Post. What's the headline of this article here about WMDs? The evidence is what? It's irrefutable. We got them. They absolutely have this stuff. It's really dangerous. And then you see the politicians start to kind of pitch the exact same things. So here's President Bush. What is he clearly warning, if you can summarize this quotation? What does he have? He's got weapons. He's going to use them. Also, I guess Bush was told by God that he needs to end the tyranny in Iraq, so we'll put that aside as well. So that's another issue. But then Dick Cheney, the vice president, what's he saying up here? He's got the weapons. What's he going to do? He's going to kill all of us. Here's Joe Biden when he was the senator from Delaware. What's he clearly saying in this? It's going to be too late. We can't wait. We got to operate right now. We got to get in there. Here's Hillary Clinton when she was the senator from New York. Does she sound exactly like President Bush and Dick Cheney? Yeah. Okay, exact same sort of setting. Yeah, Ruth? Yeah.
Did they know they were lying, or were they convinced of this?
No, I think most of them knew. I mean, they're bought and paid and sold for by the big Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, which I'll get into in a second. I think they knew because do you remember what the UN was doing during the US's claims of like, oh yeah, they got all these WMDs and stuff? What was the United Nations actually trying to do? They were investigating. I don't know if anybody remembers Hans Blix, but he was the UN investigator. He was the weapons inspector. He was going into Iraq. He didn't find anything, but the US did not allow him to finish his investigation. So everyone knew it was just, let's bulldoze this, let's get this act through, let's start this war, and then that's it. We're in it. That's the end of it. So that's my take. I think they absolutely knew what was going on.
Then there was the Project for a New American Century that outlined which countries ought to be demolished.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. So the other big thing that I want to focus on is the media. How do you think the media reacted to President Bush's claims, Hillary Clinton's claims, all the politicians' claims? Did they challenge it or did they parrot it? They parroted it. Again, I love this quote from Chomsky. I've shown it to you a couple times, but any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media, especially the corporate media. Because you start to see headlines like this. This is the New York Times, okay? The vaunted paper of record. What are they saying here? What do we have to do? We must strike at Saddam. Here's Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of the UK during this saying, hey, he could launch a chemical warhead within minutes. We got to go after him. Here's all the headlines from the New York Times throughout the years. How to choke Iraq. Bombing Iraq actually isn't enough. We need to go farther than that. American bombs make Iraq stronger. Stuff like this you would see. And then it gets even worse. Here's Time magazine for who? For kids. What are they saying here? Saddam's hiding something. We got to find it, children. So it gets real deep, real dark. And then ways that it was also pitched to the American people. It's going to be a merciful war. We're going to do it nicely. So this is all going to work out at the end of the day. And then you just saw complete fabrications, which we've also seen throughout U.S. history. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but this started to get pitched in the U.S. media that Saddam had a shredder, not a paper shredder, a people shredder, okay? Why make up a lie like this? Again, this was totally bogus and it being completely false, but why put a story like this out into the press? Demonize. It makes Saddam look like this cartoonishly evil villain. Who cares about him? We gotta take him out. So these are the sorts of lies that the media pitched. And then I gotta throw somebody else under the bus. Everybody knows Oprah, right? Here's Oprah in the build-up to the Iraq War. And I think this is fascinating to take a look at.
Even Oprah got in on the act, featuring in October 2002, New York Times reporter Judith Miller.
And just so you know, this is right before the vote for the Iraq War was about to go down, so that's the context here.
The U.S. intelligence community believes that Saddam Hussein has deadly stocks of anthrax, of botulinum toxin, which is one of the most virulent poisons known to man.
Liberal hawk Kenneth Pollock.
And what we know for a fact from a number of defectors who've come out of Iraq over the years is that Saddam Hussein is absolutely determined to acquire nuclear weapons and is building them as fast as he can.
And the right-hand man to Ahmed Chalabi.
And so, do the Iraqi people want the American people to liberate them?
Absolutely. In 1991, Iraqi people...
I hope that doesn't offend you.
When one guest dared to express doubt, Oprah would have none of it.
I just don't know what to believe with the media.
Oh, we're not trying to show you propaganda. We're just showing you what is.
I understand that.
Okay, you have a right to your opinion.
That's
right. Does that tell you about the mainstream media during this time period? If you questioned anything, what happened to you? Just shut up. That's it. So I don't know if people are familiar with the book, Manufacturing Consent. And then also another one that I want to highlight. So that's Chomsky's book with Edward Herman. They co-wrote it. But another one that I actually like a little bit better, if you're interested in taking a deep dive into how the corporate media operates in the United States, Michael Parenti's Inventing Reality is phenomenal to really get to the underpinnings of why does the media operate the way that it operates. So Manufacturing Consent and Inventing Reality, if you're interested at all in how the media functions and why it doesn't really serve people's needs, 2 books that do a great job of that. Now, this is how consent was manufactured during this. This is a great media study. If you can look closely at this graph up here. Can you take a second and examine that? What does it show you about the way this war was portrayed in the build-up to it? Take a second, take a look at that. Let me know if you can summarize it. If you're confused, what was the only thing or only types of sources that were being put on the news media during this time period? Only pro-war sources. You saw very, very little anti-war sources. Okay, so that's, when you look at a study of it, that's all people were hearing was pro-war source after pro-war source, ultimately. And I'll give you kind of a modern day version of that, which I think is fascinating. So I'll read this quote if you can't see it up here. This is from Chomsky, but he says, "The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum." Can you give me a modern day example of this quote 100% ringing true? Where it looks like you have the illusion of this wide spectrum of political debate, but that's not actually what's taking place when you critically think about what you're looking at. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, Democrats versus Republicans. Everybody knows, like, have you ever seen a panel on election night for CNN? How many people are typically on that panel on election night? Or for a debate or anything like that? What do you notice when you look at this? There's a lot of people. What would you think? There's all these varied perspectives. Is there actually a very narrow sliver of the political spectrum that is actually represented by these panels? Yes, this is a great example of what Chomsky's talking about here. Yeah, you're not going to see him. Of course not. You're not going to see like a communist perspective on this at all. That's left out, and that's on purpose. Okay, it presents the illusion that you have this wide variety of opinion up here, but you really don't. So that's kind of what we saw during this. Do you think this corporate media propaganda blitz, do you think it worked on the US population? Hell yeah. Look at public opinion on the eve of the Iraq War. Yeah, Mark?
Do you remember when they used to rate, like on the bottom of like Fox News, like red would be like high terror risk? And I remember that when I was a kid and always looking at me like, are we in red? Are we in yellow?
Oh yeah, the terror threat level. Yes. That was a way to terrify people, and especially since you were a child, you're like, oh, this is horrifying, and puts you on edge, and that's the whole point. That's a great example. But yeah, what was the opinion of the Iraq War? Was it a mistake or not when we first started it? No, not a mistake. 75% of the American people thought, oh, hell yeah, we got to go into Iraq. We absolutely need to do this. What do you notice throughout the history of that war? Whoops. Do you think this happens in every single U.S. war? Yeah, it always starts like, oh yeah, we got to go in, and then in the middle of it, everyone realizes, oh, we were lied to, whoops. But nobody ever picks up on or thinks about that moving forward, which is depressing for me. To make things worse, there are still 4 in 10 American citizens who believe that Iraq had WMDs. Yeah, that we actually found them. We never found WMDs, but there's still 40% of the American people that think that we did. So that's how widespread and effective this propaganda can be. It's nuts. But yeah, I already mentioned Hans Blix and what the UN was doing. He was not allowed to finish his investigation. So we just bulldozed our way into Iraq, and that was the start of it. So I'll highlight a couple more quick things, and we'll actually get into the war itself and some of the war crimes that were committed. But how many members of Congress do you think voted against authorizing the U.S. military to actually take action after 9/11? Barbara Lee, very good. 1. It was 420 to 1. Okay, Barbara Lee, the Democratic representative in California, she was the only one in the House of Representatives to vote no on the use of military force in response to 9/11. That's it. In the Senate, do you think there was anybody that voted against military authorization in the Senate? No, it was 98 to 0. Okay? And then for the Iraq War itself, just to give you the numbers, when it came to actual authorization for the Iraq War, it was 296 to 113, so it wasn't even close. The Senate was about the same breakdown, 77 to 23. So it was pretty much universal that the U.S. is going to get involved in the Iraq War. So let's take a look at this. So the war starts right at the end of 2002 or at the start of 2003. These are the countries that joined the U.S. in the Iraq War. There's one major nation missing here that usually goes hand in hand with the U.S. in just about any war, but they did not come with us for the Iraq War. What country is missing up here? The French. Do you know why the French decided, no thanks? And this was Jacques Chirac, was the Prime Minister of France during the time period, if you remember him, but he gave a pretty specific reason. It's basic. They don't have weapons. This is dumb. Like, what are you doing? This is a huge mistake. How did the U.S. respond to France for not going along with us in the mission in Iraq? Yeah, we changed our French fries. We don't call them French fries anymore. What do we call them? Freedom fries, all right? If you want to talk about just basic stupidity, I think this really gets to the heart of the American psyche. So, yeah, we're done with the French. We have freedom fries here. We don't have French fries because they're weak. They're pathetic. They're not with us on this. So, I mean, that was crazy. Yeah, fresh cut freedom fries. Yep, get your freedom fries right here. So, yeah, tells you a lot. So the Iraq War starts to build. You can see the massive amount of troops that we eventually sent into Iraq. So, upwards of 160,000 at different points in time. But how was this war initially pitched to the American people? How long did we say it's going to take? In and out. It's going to be like 6 weeks, maybe tops. And then Dick Cheney, putting up quotes like this. My belief is we will in fact be greeted as liberators. We're going to be welcomed by the Iraqi people, and they're just going to love us so much, they're going to throw down their arms, and it's going to be game over. That's not what happened at all. And then the way that we actually started the Iraq War, I'll never forget this because this is when I was a freshman in college. Operation Shock and Awe. This was live streamed on CNN of the United States military just carpet bombing Baghdad and major cities across Iraq ultimately. There were tons of civilians that were obviously killed in these attacks, but I'll never forget this. I was watching this in my dorm room. Like I said, it was being live streamed on CNN. Do you know what I heard throughout the campus of SUNY Oneonta while I was witnessing this? Cheers, applause, people going nuts. It told me a lot about the tenor of the country and how easily people can be manipulated into supporting absolute atrocities. So that was a clarifying moment for me that I definitely wanted to share with all of you. So then, the ground invasion eventually started after that. President Bush claimed 2 months into the war that the war was over. If you remember his mission accomplished photo op, that was obviously not the case because we still have troops in Iraq today. But then, do you remember the big reasons why the U.S. military greatly struggled inside of Iraq? There's multiple reasons, but if you can pinpoint one. Couldn't deal with the terrain. I mean, you're on other people's home turf. The IEDs as well that were set up, and just people protecting like their homes and stuff. It made it very difficult ultimately. And then, early on in the war, do you remember what happened to Saddam Hussein himself? Yeah, he was captured, he was killed, he was placed on trial, he was executed on live television.
He was humiliated.
Yeah, he was absolutely humiliated. The trial itself was a complete sham. It was riddled with international law violations, okay? And then he was ultimately executed and killed early on. But can you read President Bush's statement up here? What did even Bush realize about the execution and trial of Saddam? What did it look like? It was a revenge killing. Like, this had no merit, had no international law merit. People just wanted him dead, and it delegitimized the government that the U.S. put in place to replace Saddam. So, end result is once Saddam was taken out of power, there was a power vacuum that was created inside of Iraq. Who filled that power vacuum ultimately? I'll show you the cartoon if you need help with that. Who filled that power vacuum in Iraq? ISIS. If you really think about it, how did that almost play into the United States' hands when you really get down to the basic reasons behind this? What do we have to do now? ISIS is here. We got to stay here forever. Okay, so it justified us continuing to stay inside of Iraq even after Saddam was long gone. We got to stay. And that's where you start to see the death toll just get out of control. When you look at Iraqi civilian deaths, the estimates are anywhere from 200,000 to over 1 million Iraqis ultimately dying, depending on what study you look at. The pictures coming out of Iraq were absolutely horrific. You see this kid with his soccer ball just trying to enjoy like his day, and there's just blood spilling down the streets of Iraq. That bodies just piling up all over the place. And then this is really telling, but what was this soldier looking for inside of this house in Iraq? What might be under this woman's cabinets? There might be WMDs. Maybe they're secretly stashing inside of people's houses. So we got to go door to door and terrorize these people. What we were really doing is this. What were we doing inside of Iraq? Stealing their gold, stealing their oil, stealing their resources. That's really what we were after. But yeah, the death toll all over the place. And then, of course, President Bush's response to all this, because eventually it came to light, a couple years into the war, they're like, oh yeah, Iraq doesn't have WMDs. Here's President Bush's response to being called out on that stuff.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
Ha 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 ha, how fun. Do you know who is laughing at his pathetic and immoral jokes here? This is the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The people in the audience are journalists. Okay, that makes this so much worse. Because what is a journalist's job supposed to be? Yeah, challenge people in power. Instead, they were just laughing along. I guess we didn't fight WMDs, so no big deal. All right, let's get into the really tough stuff here. So specific war crimes that I think need to be highlighted to show you the depravity of the war in Iraq. Let's start with this in 2004, the Battle of Fallujah. The Battle of Fallujah, what this became known for was U.S. troops using white phosphorus, which is completely illegal, and also using depleted uranium shells inside of this battle, which was like a neighborhood battle, a smaller town inside of Iraq. Just horrific atrocities happening here. And the U.S. admitted to this. They went openly admitted, yeah, we use white phosphorus, which, again, if you're not familiar, this burns the skin in horrific ways. And what you're seeing now, even still today inside of Fallujah, is a toxic legacy that's worse than Hiroshima. Children today inside of Fallujah, because of the depleted uranium that was used, being born with horrific birth defects, childhood cancers, that are on levels that make what Hiroshima look like, it just dwarfs it. Okay, so like if you look at the statistics of what I have up here, it's, researchers found a 38-fold increase in leukemia. So just horrific things that are happening to children. That legacy continues today. Because as most of you know, once you have radiation poisoning, can they get passed down through your genes? Yeah. Okay, so that lingers, that lasts. And you're seeing like stillborn babies with gigantic tumors and stuff. It all ties back to that, the Battle of Fallujah in our time there. To make things worse, and these two guys will know what I'm talking about, an American company decided to make a video game called 6 Days in Fallujah, where you get to play as the US Marines and continue like the atrocities that were committed there. And this game, sadly, is fairly popular with PC players in particular. So it's pretty disgusting to me, but we're like glorifying this stuff, and kids are playing this and think, oh yeah, this was great what happened here. Then another horrific massacre, this was 3 years later, the Nisar Square massacre. If you're not familiar with this, it was basically the US troops just opening fire in this crowded square. You can see the aftermath of all this. But do you know who committed the Nisar Square massacre and massacred all the people that you see up here? Yes. If you're not familiar with Blackwater, it's a private military company that the US would contract with from time to time to fight alongside US troops. They're the ones that panicked, opened fire, laid waste to all these people ultimately, and those are the 4 mercenaries that really got targeted with the atrocity that was committed here. But you can clearly see what I have, or you can take your best guess. Do you know what happened to these 4 Blackwater mercenaries? They were convicted. They were supposed to serve a life sentence for their atrocities. Do you know what happened to them in 2020? Do you know who pardoned them? It was Trump. Yep, Trump in 2020 pardoned all of them. No accountability whatsoever. They still have Blackwater still operating. Eric Prince still out there. No different.
The head of Blackwater's sister, Department of Education.
Betsy DeVos. Yes, exactly. So there's an unfortunate connection there with all those people. Yeah, Betsy DeVos, the former Secretary of Education, is the sister of Eric Prince, who's the head of Blackwater. So it's all connected. It's all disgusting. That's a great point. But let's get to Julian Assange, okay, and what was eventually exposed of even more war crimes. I'll play this clip for you, but this was a video that eventually leaked out to the American public, and I think it is damning.
For more than 2.5 years, the wire service Reuters has been trying to find out what happened to their 2 staff members on this street in the suburb of New Baghdad. WikiLeaks says this is what happened.
Yep, he's got a weapon too. Hotel 26, Crazy Horse 18, have 5 to 6 individuals with AK-47s. We got RPG. All right, we got a guy with
The voice on the tape, presumably a member of the military, says there has been shooting in the area and receives permission to open fire.
When people are labeled as insurgents, are they really insurgents? It seems to be the case that from the scenes in this video, that any person that is not a man and sometimes not a woman is by default labeled as an insurgent.
Light them all up. 202 traffic, 260. Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shoot. God damn it, Kyle. All right. I hit him. Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards. Nice. 2-6, crazy.
From a distance, you hear the voices on the tape watch as the wounded try to crawl to help. But when help arrives...
Come on, let us shoot. You're engaged. 1-8, engaged. Clear. Come on. Clear. Oh yeah, look at that, right through the windshield.
In this video, I think you see the corruption of pilots and the military by war itself, in particular by the modern nature of aerial warfare. So you see these young pilots acting like they're playing video games, only the high scores they are getting are with real human lives.
We call frequency. Yeah, I just drove over a body. Yeah.
Viper 5, 2 report, free change zone 4.
Even from high above, the harsh reality becomes evident as the troops that arrive find 2 children wounded. You see them carry their small bodies and call for help.
Hey, I need to get the brass to drop ramps. I got a wounded girl. We need to take the rest of mine.
The response on the tape.
Oh, it's their fault for bringing their kids to a battle. That's right.
Patty Colhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Yeah, that's about as bad as it can possibly get. But the response there, so who was killed? There was 2 Reuters journalists that were embedded in the Iraq War that the U.S. military just opened fire on and killed. So those are 2. And then there was children there that were also obviously slaughtered, as you saw. But that last response, I really want you to take a second and think about that. That military member saying, that's what they get for bringing their kid to a battle. What does that demonstrate about the attitude of the United States? Very ignorant. Who brought this battle to them? We brought this war to them, but we have the arrogance to say, oh, it's their fault for even bringing a child around in this area. So, and the battlefield is their house, exactly, and their home, their homeland. So those are the 2 journalists that were killed. They were the ones on the tape that the military thought they were holding like AK-47s and stuff. You see what he was actually holding? A camera. Okay? And then obviously it was Julian Assange who leaked this out to the American public, and he's the head of WikiLeaks, if you're not familiar with him. There's tons of other videos besides that one that got dubbed collateral damage. I'm not going to play them for you. If you would like me to share them with you at all, they're all horrific, just like the one that I showed you. Obviously, how's the American government going to respond to what Julian Assange is doing here? They're going to demonize him. They're going to go after him. So I'm going to skip over these other videos. They're also atrocious. I think you get it. This one, just real quick, I'll just explain this for you. This is a U.S. military member bragging openly about committing horrific sexual assault on like a 12-year-old girl. So these are the sorts of things that Assange was putting out and exposing how depraved military action was inside of the Iraq War. This one's disgusting as well. Like military members, I watched this video, I don't recommend that you do. Like killing animals, like just disgusting stuff. So do you know how Julian Assange obtained all these material? How did he actually get this stuff? It's kind of fascinating. And then put it out to the public. Yes, do you know the name of the American military member who actually had a conscience, saw what was happening here, and exposed it to Assange? Yeah, it's Chelsea Manning. Yes, exactly. So Chelsea Manning was a U.S. military intelligence analyst who got their hands on this footage, and eventually it gave it to Assange. Assange then published it on WikiLeaks, and the whole world finally saw what was actually happening on the ground. She got demonized big time. And just I'll flash forward through some of this stuff because I think you get it. But do you know what happened to Assange in particular and Chelsea Manning once this stuff got out to the public? Start with Assange. You know what happened to Julian Assange? He was put in prison. Okay, and he was a Swedish citizen. It's actually where he's from. But it's a wild story of him being arrested, trying to be turned over to the United States. The U.S. wanting to put him on trial and ultimately maybe execute him for exposing this stuff. I don't want to get too into the weeds with that. Same thing happened though for Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning was put in jail with supposedly under the Espionage Act, which I just mentioned to you, was supposed to be in jail for 35 years. President Obama commuted her sentence ultimately, and she ended up serving 7 years, but she was in jail for a long time before she got released. And again, for doing what? Telling the truth. That's, again, the big picture thing that I want to focus on, and I guess just to skip ahead to really drive home the point, I love this graphic. It's this. What is the difference that you notice between people that commit war crimes and people that expose war crimes? If you commit those war crimes, what does President Bush get to do today? Yeah, he gets to just hang out, have a good time. If you're somebody that actually has guts and wants to expose the atrocities that were being committed, you get punished for it instead. It just shows how out of whack basic morals are. This just happened, a little while back. Assange finally was released from prison. He came to a plea agreement with the United States, but he'd already served so much time in prison that the agreement is pretty basic. He's allowed now to go free. He just can never come to the United States. Not that he would ever want to be here, but that was the agreement. All right, other quick atrocities, then we'll take a break. I just want to show you one more thing, is Guantanamo Bay, and also torture of Iraqis during the Iraq War in particular. Pictures like this, I think, are just absolutely heartbreaking. So this is, one of the Iraqi prisons that was set up. The American military was just throwing random people in jail and holding them indefinitely without any sort of, reasonable cause, anything along those lines. And that picture on the left is just horrific when you look at that, of then allowing children to go in, but they wouldn't even allow the bags to be taken off of prisoners' heads and stuff. So, just as bad as it can possibly get. And then even worse, I think most of you will remember, this stuff eventually leaked out to the press in about 2004, about a year into the war, Abu Ghraib. Okay, so I'm sure you remember this picture in particular. How are Iraqis being tortured with an image like this? You know what is happening? It might be tough for you to see, but electrocution. If you stepped off that box, you were electrocuted. You can see wires attached to this individual. And then the other pictures that leaked out of what the military members were doing inside of Abu Ghraib is just atrocious. Stripping people naked, mocking them, taking pictures like this.
That's the cancer.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And what do you notice about the expressions on military members' faces during all this? Glee. They're thinking it's so funny to do this sort of stuff. Piling people on top of each other, sitting on people, using people as bullet practice. Okay, so these were some of the images that eventually leaked out. Just beating the crap out of individuals. And then look close. This is disgusting, but I think it is important to take a look at this stuff. Do you see what they did to this prisoner? It's human excrement. Okay, just smearing it all over them. And then taking urine-soaked underwear, putting it on people's faces. Again, just like I said, the most depraved stuff that you could possibly imagine. And then, I think everybody will remember this, the waterboardings that took place during Abu Ghraib as well. Do you remember what propaganda term? And Dick Cheney, I think, was the one who first coined this phrase. Because everybody said, once these waterboarding stuff leaked out, they're like, this is absolutely torture, what the hell are we doing? But then the Bush administration put a nice little spin on it. And they said, this is not torture, it's something else. And they made it sound like it was okay for us to do this. You're so close with that. You said enhanced something. You got it. This is not torture. These are just enhanced interrogation techniques. Okay? And there's obviously the Bush administration was pushing this quite hard. Do you think that torture is probably banned by the UN?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's how you get around it. Just come up with a nice fancy term like enhanced interrogation techniques instead. That's Article 5 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which is pretty ironclad. Don't torture people or degrade them. We are violating every single sentence or every single line in that article during this time period. So, do you think anybody was held accountable though for Abu Ghraib? Not at all. You might remember the woman that was taking those pictures and pointing and laughing. That's Lindy England. She was given a 3-year sentence and she only served a 1.5 years. And she was under house arrest basically the entire time. And she showed pretty much no remorse. If you read her quote up here, they weren't innocent, they're trying to kill us, and you want me to apologize to them? It's like saying sorry to the enemy. Okay, so that, again, gives you deep insight into the psyche of the U.S. Last thing, then we'll take a break. How do you think President Bush is viewed today in the United States? Based on everything that I showed you, how should President Bush be viewed? Negatively. He should be demonized in the press. Do you know what his image is like today? He's been resurrected, totally resuscitated. Everybody thinks he's just like a fun, dumb guy. He's like your kind of, dumb uncle, basically, that just hangs out with you. He's just a cool dude. And what does he get to do now? He just gets to paint. He paints these lovely pictures. This is a great meme, but it really is the joys of whitewashing with George W. Bush, because that's what has happened to his legacy now. It's been completely whitewashed. Everyone forgets about all the atrocities that I just showed you. It's no big deal. He even gets to teach a master class now as well, along with Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton. Can you see what his master class is about? He gets to teach you all about what? Leadership. He's just the best leader ever. So yeah, you want to learn about leadership? Go for it. I'm going to throw one of my wife's family members under the bus here as well, but Bush, yeah, I had to, yeah. Yeah. They love George W. Bush because he paints pictures of African women, and that's wonderful. So let's forget about all the war crimes and atrocities. He painted this picture, so he must be super cool. Yeah, so progressive, exactly. He's just so far ahead of the game. Now, this is huge. Who could have actually held President Bush and his administration accountable for these countless war crimes that I just walked you through, and instead did absolutely nothing but provide cover for him? It's Obama. If you want to pinpoint one individual, it's President Obama. Okay, and I'll show you this. On Inauguration Day, there was a huge push for people, for the Obama administration as they were entering office to actually go after President Bush, go after the Bush administration, and say, we're going to hold you accountable for these awful war crimes. And instead, this was from Obama's book that came out just a couple of years ago. I'll read this for you if you can't see it, but this was on Inauguration Day in 2009. This was President Obama's responses to protesters that wanted to hold Bush accountable. So he says this: I felt quietly angry on his behalf. That to protest a man in the final hour of his presidency seemed graceless and unnecessary. More generally, I was troubled by what these last-minute protests said about the divisions that were churning across the country and the weakening of whatever boundaries of decorum had once regulated politics. What is Obama more concerned about? Decorum and the aesthetics and the looks. He didn't like the way that people were protesting. That's unnecessary, that's graceless in his eyes. Okay, that to me is pathetic. Okay, if I can put it as bluntly as possible. Because those are the protesters outside saying, hey, this guy tortured a whole bunch of people, maybe we should do something about it. That was not the case at all. And then to make things worse, Obama's Department of Justice eventually granted immunity for any past Bush administration members, so you can never hold them accountable for anything whatsoever. And then you start to see pictures like this. Yep, Obama and Bush having a great time. There's Michelle Obama and President Bush having a great time. He gave her a cough drop, and that's why she was so thankful for that. So, you know, she's just a really nice guy at the end of the day. And that's why I love the George Carlin quote. It's a big club, but what? You in it. How does the media typically portray the relationships between the individuals that you see up here? That they are enemies, they hate each other. What's really happening behind the scenes? Shaking hands, they're getting along just fine. Okay, it's all an illusion, it's a joke. One last person that I absolutely want to target. Ellen DeGeneres. Ellen is very close with George W. Bush. And when Ellen was at her height, when she had her talk show that was doing like phenomenal ratings numbers, she was photographed at the Dallas Cowboys game, because George W. Bush is from Texas, he's a big Cowboys fan. They were photographed in a private box, hanging out, laughing, having a great time. Do you know what people started to say about Ellen once these pictures were posted? People were like, hey, Ellen, maybe you shouldn't hang out with like a war criminal and stuff. Here's Ellen's response. And just so you know, this is an edited video. So what you're going to see is Ellen's response to being called out for hanging out with George W. Bush. Somebody edited in the background all the horrific war crimes that I showed you. So this is not what actually aired, but I think it's important to juxtapose against each other. But listen to Ellen's justification for this, and I really want to hear your thoughts in a second.
So I want to talk about something that happened this weekend. I know it's Tuesday. Sometimes I like to ruminate on things all day Monday so that on Tuesday you hear about it. So this weekend I went to Dallas for the Cowboys game. And thanks. But during the game, they showed a shot of George and me laughing together. And so people were upset. They thought, why is a gay Hollywood liberal sitting next to a conservative Republican president? Didn't even notice I'm holding the brand new iPhone 11. And but a lot of people were mad, and they did what people do when they're mad. They tweet. And but here's one tweet that I loved. This person says, Ellen and George Bush together makes me have faith in America again. And exactly. Here's the thing. I'm friends with George Bush. In fact, I'm friends with a lot of people who don't share the same beliefs that I have. We're all different, and I think that we've forgotten that that's okay that we're all different. For instance, I wish people wouldn't wear fur. I don't like it, but I'm friends with people who wear fur. And I'm friends with people who are furry, as a matter of fact. I have friends who should tweeze more. And I have... But just because I don't agree with someone on everything doesn't mean that I'm not going to be friends with them. When I say be kind to one another, I don't mean only the people that think the same way that you do. I mean be kind to everyone. Doesn't matter. Even people who are already playing Christmas music. I mean, seriously. There's no excuse for that, but I'm kind to them. Anyway, I want to thank Jerry Jones, Charlotte Jones for hosting us, and thanks President Bush and Laura for a Sunday afternoon that was so fun. By the way, you owe me $6 for the nacho.
I'm going to lose my mind watching that, but yeah. Yeah.
Just our Nobel laureate, Bill, the Masters of War, just covering it all. Really.
Good. Yeah, nice deep dive into it. Exactly. All right, last thing before we take a break, I just want you to look at this because it ties directly into the clip that I just showed you of Ellen. Look at number 3, and I would like to discuss this right after we come back. And then I just have I'll go very quickly through the Afghanistan war. I just want to highlight a couple things that I think have been forgotten recently, but it'll only take me about 10 minutes to go through that. Then I'd really want to hear your thoughts if you have any questions about that stuff. So let's take a quick break. Take a look at number 3. And I really want to get your take on that. Then I'll quickly go through the Afghanistan war, and then we'll wrap up real quick. I know we're going a little bit long. I'll go very quickly through this. I'll just highlight a couple things for you to wrap up, and then if you have any questions, we can discuss that. But for the economic costs of the war on terror, we've spent, according to some studies, $14 trillion on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And you can take a close look up here of like what that money ultimately culminates in, but the numbers are just off the charts. If you actually break it down, like what could we spend that money on? The answers are things that we've talked about in the past. You could spend it on a whole bunch of registered nurses or public housing units or jobs that actually pay with benefits. There's basic necessities that people need that we could very easily use that $14 trillion for instead, but that's just not the case.
This is such a classic overbalance.
Yes, it's ridiculous. When you really look at it, it's just absurd. Like, we could meet everyone's basic needs 10 times over and then some, and we just don't. And this is the reason why. Who has greatly profited from the war on terror the last 20 years? Absolutely. Like, do you recognize the names of some of these companies? Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all of them. So if you look at, here's Lockheed Martin's stock price. When do you notice Lockheed Martin just going through the roof when it comes to their stock price? What years? The Iraq War. Okay, they start profiting insane amounts of money. Private military contractors. Look at how much money we spent on them. Just private money, being spent on...
if you don't drop bombs, you don't have to replace them.
Right. That's it. It's as simple as that. And then who controls all the oil inside of Iraq now? American companies, BP, so British Petroleum's there as well, Shell. Yup, for sure. No doubt. That's why this meme is totally accurate. When the recipe says put oil in the pan, who shows up? The U.S. military is going to be there. That's a pretty good one. But there's ExxonMobil stock. ExxonMobil stock. You notice that you can see the years at the bottom. When does it start to jump radically? Early 2000s. It's the same thing. There's, Shell's stock price jumps up during the Iraq War. Does the everyday American citizen have any sort of access to these immense oil profits or no? Okay? So, end result of all this, this is the military-industrial complex just on steroids. Because what does eventually show up, the people that do profit from this, there's Burger Kings that are on our military bases all over the world. So Burger King makes a whole bunch of money as a result of U.S. imperialism ultimately. This picture, I think, is so critical to understand. Look at this image at a U.S. military base. And look at my question. Does this one image perfectly summarize the United States? How could you make the argument that this does perfectly summarize the U.S.? What are you seeing here that I think really gets to the heart of everything that I'm talking about? Yeah.
The equation of corporation to the country.
Perfect.
Whose flag is that on the left?
Oh, I can't actually tell. That's a great question. I should have looked at that a little closer. I don't know.
McDonald's. We all
You got McDonald's in the U.S. flag. That's really what I'm trying to show. But yeah.
I don't know, what the, a flag is. That like a half-mast flag?
Yes.
So, the United States has been at war for almost over 95% of its history.
Yes.
So that's kind of symbolic too, because the U.S.'s history of always going into imperialist wars kind of symbolizes, a country that's always at war and is in bed with corporatism at all times.
It's that perfect blend of corporatism and the United States government just being one and the same ultimately. So I really like that image.
I want to say
Yeah.
too that Americans don't have to know anything about the world because they'll have their McDonald's with them.
That's right. As simple as that.
Yeah.
Great point. Now, how has the U.S. citizen paid for these wars the last 20 years? All of our tax dollars. Okay, and again, excellent cartoon. This cartoon is over 70 years old. It's sad how accurate it still is today. What's the clear message of this one? War is all that matters. That's where all the money goes for. Everything else gets starved, and just kind of do the best you can to figure it out. So these are, things that I've shown you, but this is just a great summation of everything. But according to the average American reading speed, in the time it takes you to read this tweet, your government will have spent more than $11 million paying for war. Okay, so there, in that time I read that, there goes $11 million that could have gone to something else.
And what is it, the Pentagon either can't pass an audit or the audits never get
They cannot, they fail every single audit, or the audits don't happen, but we don't even know where most of the money goes that gets sent to the Pentagon, because those audits, Yes, yep, exactly. But yeah, I'll skip over a couple things here, but just get to the big picture point that I'm trying to make. Iraq has a government today. It's not super stable, but even the Iraqi prime minister, who's obviously a puppet of the United States, who's still there? The U.S., we're still there. Okay, the war has ended officially, but we're still there. There's still U.S. military bases. Those profits are still, being cultivated in a different way. So it's forever war. That's really the main driver of the U.S. economy at this point in time. All right, for Afghanistan, let me just very quickly go through this. I already went through the history of all this stuff. So the big thing that I want to stress is what the Afghanistan war eventually became, unfortunately, best known for were the horrific drone strikes that the U.S. military was carrying out. And if you look at some of the images of the U.S. drone striking Afghan weddings and stuff and killing multitudes of civilians, it's insane. And you can clearly see it out there. Which president was the one that escalated the drone strikes during the Afghanistan war? It was Obama. That became what he was kind of best known for, was these horrific drone strikes.
Good at killing, he said.
Yes, he did say that. And that's why if you read this tweet, if Obama apologized for one civilian drone victim every day, it would take 3 years for him to successfully apologize. So that's how widespread these drone strikes ultimately were. And this is just, I don't even have words for this. Do you know what prize Obama won in 2009 just because people were hopeful that he was going to end the war in Iraq and Afghanistan? He won the Nobel Peace Prize for literally doing nothing. Just people thinking, well, maybe he's going to end these, so let's give him a prize for it. This is crazy. But Obama is the only Nobel Peace Prize winner to bomb another Nobel Peace Prize winner. Because in 2015, what incredible world organization did he bomb in Afghanistan? Doctors Without Borders, which does incredible work in war-torn areas and just around the world in general. Obama sent a bomb that blew one of their hospitals up. Okay, so the disconnect there is just wild. Then the sad result of all this is obviously the civilians that were impacted by the drone strikes, but you look at testimony from an Afghan child like this, who's 13 years old, who says, I no longer love blue skies. In fact, I now prefer gray skies. The drones do not fly when the skies are gray. Okay, so that's the level of depravity that we're talking about here, but this, and actually my wife is, greatly impacted by this, but that's what we started to call the people that we were killing with these drone strikes, started to call them bug splats. You're just completely dehumanizing them. So what Afghan civilians started to do was make these huge collages and murals of themselves just on the ground, so that at least when these drone strikes happened, maybe you'd appeal to some sense of morality from these people that are actually committing these atrocities to say, well, this is who you're actually killing, is this child right here. But the droning continued regardless. And then to make things worse, once these drone strikes and the collateral damage and all the civilians that were ultimately killed came to the forefront, here's Obama at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
The Jonas brothers are here. They're out there somewhere. Sasha and Malia are huge fans, but boys don't get any ideas. I have 2 words for you: Predator drones. You will never see it coming. You think I'm joking?
Again, who is laughing there? This is the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's the press. Okay, so same thing. And then Obama's excuse for all this was that I didn't want to look soft on terrorism, so I became a massive war hawk, ultimately, because I didn't want to be called out as being weak on terror or weak on war or anything like that. Yeah, right.
I mean, the only thing I was glad about is that they didn't kill him, maybe because of that.
No, yeah, possibly. Yeah, could be. But yeah, like you look at a meme like this. Do you get what this one's arguing? Does it really ultimately matter when you're talking about war at the end of the day? They're both.
Hey, we got rainbow bombs.
You got rainbow bombs now, so that's okay. No, those are acceptable. But all right, you get the point that I'm trying to make there. But last thing on the drone strikes is, do you know why we know about the widespread civilian killings? There was another whistleblower that's not as well known as Snowden, not as well known as Assange or Chelsea Manning. I hope somebody's heard of him, because he really put it on the line as well to expose this stuff. What's that? No. All right, just tell me if, like, a head nod maybe at least, but Daniel Hale? Never heard of him, but he's the one that exposed the widespread war crimes of the drone strike program in particular, and he was sentenced to 45 months in prison, again, for doing this. And he was an Air Force member. He saw on the inside what was actually taking place, and he's the one that exposed that 90% of the drone strikes, who did they kill? Civilians. Okay, and there's tons of other war crimes. You can look at some of this stuff, but I mean, photo reveals Australian soldier drinking beer out of a dead Taliban fighter's prosthetic leg. As bad as it can possibly get. Here's an American sniper unit in Afghanistan. You see what flag they are proudly posing with up here? Yep, it's an SS flag from Nazi Germany. So, I won't play this clip for you, but this is Australian troops just going around and gunning down a 12-year-old child in the middle of the field. Absolutely horrific, but I'll spare you that. But that's what was happening, on almost a daily basis inside of Afghanistan. So, end result is this. I think this does sum up everything that I've talked about here with Afghanistan in one cartoon. What started all this in the first place in 1979? We armed the Taliban. Then what did we decide to do? Killed the Taliban. And then the Taliban came back anyway, and then we left, and civilians inside of Afghanistan now are just doing whatever they possibly can to try to hang on at this point in time. And then that, mantra of forever war, that still rings quite true, because if you look at these two headlines from Time magazine, so this is Time magazine in 2001, on the eve of the Afghanistan war. Imagine how much better Afghan women's lives will be if we invade. Then all of a sudden, that did not obviously come true. Time magazine now in 2010. We can't leave because women are being treated worse than ever. So what do? What do we have to do then? We just bomb them or just stay there forever. So again, to drive my point home of the original point that I was making at the beginning of this, and that's the first question that I'd really like to ask you if you look at your sheet now, I guess, to get into the Q&A segment here real quick. That was my argument. Capitalism equals cancer. It has to expand. It has to exploit. It has to have war in order to properly function. If you look at the comparison up here, do you notice a difference between wars perpetrated by a capitalist nation and one perpetrated by a communist nation? Why do you think we engage in so many wars nonstop? That's the whole point, is to expand and exploit. Okay, that's really what it comes down to. And even for China, you notice the wars that they did engage in. Do you know why China got involved in Vietnam? Yeah, to protect North Vietnam and also to stop the Cambodian genocide that was taking place right next door. Okay, so that's how they got involved. For us, it's to make money. It really is as simple as that at the end of the day. So
along with this expansion is the expansion of mental illness, the kind that is, the personality that's behind that kind of behavior.
It perpetrates and trickles down into all of us here inside the U.S. It poisons people. Yeah.
You notice all the rise of incivility.
Yes.
And it's a problem.
No doubt. All right, if you guys have any questions or if there's any discussion questions that you really like, maybe we can start.